10 minutes before the hour, maybe 9 now. So I have about 9 minutes that I can connect and engage with you all here today. And so some quick information first. B1 Brother Moses. And we got work to do. So let me start off by saying all rights reserved to the people whose content were in this screenshot as we review how they tell his story. Interconnected storylines are hard to keep a balance on, so I'm gonna make sure that I try to be elaborate as I can. So first and foremost, there's some context that precedes it to protest racial violence and protect Black-owned businesses. They're using their Second Amendment rights to protect local businesses from riots and looting. Now, this story here is Reason, Zuri Davis, 529, and it is referring to the death of George Floyd. As we know, their buildup happened over time. And so in the wake of police-involved death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, armed black activists have stepped up as the city endures protests, riots, and looting. A video surfaced then. This was 5/29. All right, so date stamp. With that context, how they tell his story. Chat. I think that came in a little hot. A reading of evidence. This presentation provides references to the Blake incident, a case study of an officer-related shooting incident which occurred on August 23rd, 2020. I use Kingian dialectic, a Black first perspective addressing idealism, what ought or ought not be allowed in a civil society. Similar to Hegelian dialectics, which is in fact German philosophy, Karl Marx, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., i.e. Kingian dialectics, is Black hermeneutics. Don't call me a Marxist though. Despite that, I was born on a military base in Germany during my father's service as an MP outside Stuttgart in the late 1980s. Black hermeneutics is the branch of knowledge that deals with Black literal interpretation. Unlike the German philosophers, King's idealistic vision of America and how we should all develop or be divided and struggle with race and class. So civil rights and our pursuit for systemic justifications of Black self-defense warrant this final analysis. For awarding ADOS reparations. Final analysis. And since I own the right to that music, I can't play the whole thing, but that is the premise. What do you feel in the air? Number one, the reading of the evidence, Rayshawn White's witness statements, of course, and he also followed that up with the actual recording of the incident. So Rayshawn White's recording of the officers involved in the shooting of Jacob Blake. That information is bouncing off of Kenosha Police, a professional police association. Their attorney, their president are the ones who released statements, including a number of other folks on the other side who are making comments specifically to his story. And so we should start off with the people who were actually there. Won't find, if you look it up today, is the statement. But you do find the stories from our side. One of the things that I'm dealing with here is when we look at Rayshawn White's witness statements and then unpack it Okay. His statement is in context with an entire civil rights struggle right now. Which is why Black attorneys like Ben Crump use their Twitter follower base and their celebrity to get his story told. How they tell his story. Okay. Ben Crump says, wow, this Black man was shot several times in the back by Kenosha police today. He was getting into his car after apparently breaking up a fight between two women. He's in critical condition now. We demand justice. Black Lives Matter, with the 3 different shade of emoji of the fist on August 23rd. And so here I actually have a link embedded, a B1 in the chat, and we could rock that bad boy. If not, we'll just keep it moving. Let's see. Let me check in. Yes, sir. How they tell his story. So number one, if you just look it up in Google for the images and see what they're using as media to depict his story, these are some of the early images that I captured and that I share with you here today, because we know the story will change over time. Folks will stop searching and it will be another his story. One of the early people to capture a photo and share it to the public of his story, Anthony Brian Logan. This was published on the 24th. And the statement itself. Kenosha officers were called to a domestic incident about 5:11 p.m. Sunday. Police said the shooting unfolded on a residential street packed with apartment buildings. White says he saw Blake get out of his truck and approach his son, who was on the lawn. Blake told his son to get into the truck while Blake walked into the apartment building behind a woman who was outside. This is how White, the person who filmed it, is telling his story. And though I don't own the rights to the content, it needs to be shared. And we know the story may change over time, but let us continue the documentation. After stepping away and coming back, White said the scene drastically changed. Police were wrestling with Blake. One of them had him in a headlock and was punching him in the ribs. The other had him in the headlock on the other side of him and was pulling his arm, White told CNN. After they punched him in his ribs, the female officer tased him, and Jacob kind of leaned on the car and they proceeded to wrestle him towards the back of the car, and he went to the other side of the car. When they were on the other side of the car on the ground, I had to pick up my camera and start recording. There's some things inside of that retelling that have to be brought out. Number one, this is what White saw. The person who recorded, and even before they started recording, there was a de-escalation process. And so as we review that de-escalation process, this is White's account to CNN, an early story. It says one of them had him in the headlock and was punching him in the ribs, body shots. The other had him in the headlock on the other side of him and was pulling his arm, White told CNN. Now we could stop right there until it's 5 o'clock. And so I appreciate anybody that's rocking with us right now. And as we look at the information and documentation, this is mostly in chronological order, August 24th, 2020. For immediate release from the Kenosha officer-involved shooting update, the Wisconsin Department of Justice Division of Criminal Investigation is investigating an officer-involved shooting, OIS, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that occurred on the evening of Sunday, August 23rd, 2020. So they published immediately as they wanted to tell his story. The shooting occurred when Kenosha police officers responded to a reported domestic incident in the 2800 block of 40th Street. Law enforcement immediately provided medical aid to the person who was shot. Flight for Life transported the person to Friday hospital in Milwaukee. The person is in serious condition. DCI is leading this investigation and is assisted by Wisconsin State Patrol and Kenosha County Sheriff's Office. All involved law enforcement are fully cooperating with DCI during this investigation. The involved officers have been placed on administrative leave. DCI is continuing to review evidence and determine the facts of this incident and will turn over investigative reports to a prosecutor following a complete and thorough investigation. If members of the public have any further information regarding this incident, please contact law enforcement. All right, so DCI steps in, Department of Justice steps in with a statement real quick. And they use that statement as a bit of a scapegoat there. So let's take a little quick break. I need a little quick sip and then we'll get right back to it. Two things that I've already presented as evidence. Number one, from the cameraman himself, his witness account to CNN. And then number two, the early response from the DOJ the very next day. And so we know the media starts to get into it, which is where some of the quoting and the different information, the sources and all that, I have them available upon request, but I did not do the best of job actually capturing the sources for this information. And so that's my in my journalistic integrity right there. But I didn't do the best of job. But in these screenshots, they do recall the account. And if those sources are needed, then I would be able to retrieve them inside of the PowerPoint itself. So I'm going to continue. And how they tell his story. They say, this is Refinery 29, the Jacob Blake shooting. And let's see here, refinery29.com. In response to the news of the shooting, Kenosha residents marched through the streets to demand that the officers responsible be held accountable for their actions. By early Monday morning, several trucks had been set on fire. Buildings had been vandalized, and a small fire was also burning on the ground floor of the Kenosha County Courthouse, according to reports. Demonstrators were met by police in riot gear who wielded batons and pepper spray projectiles in order to subdue the growing crowds. That's how they tell his story. Wednesday, August 26th, conversation shifts. Something happened. And there are people who saw it happening and they were powerless to defend against it. Essentially, Facebook. Stories all over that talk about this. Said it was reported 455 times. But even the automated robots that are moderating chats and things, live streams, even those failed to flag it. And so something happened on August the 26th. That was a bit of a distraction in how they were telling his story. And so I'm going to go back to the last topic that we left off on, Refinery 29. They said in response to the shooting, Kenosha residents marched through the streets to demand that officers responsible be held accountable. We don't have to fast forward past that because that happened on Sunday, instantly responded. Which is important because people like to say, what happens to Black Lives Matter? You're close to Chicago. And so if an officer does a violation, you come together and you rally. But what happens when it's black on black crime? And for that, never mind. We say the brother was actually going to resolve a dispute between two women, according to Ben Crump, the attorney, in one of the first released statements that was telling his story. And then the eyewitness, and like you see on the screen here, those people who responded to it, what they were responding to is the fact that that guy was actually going to be a hero in that situation and was determining that he should get his kids out of the picture. Get y'all ass in the car, as he was resolving a dispute amongst adults. But yet, and so protesters began to march south on 40th Street at the end of a rally Monday afternoon. See, this is the next day, the 24th. In response to Sunday night's officer-involved shooting in Kenosha. Watch the wordplay. At one time, it was Sunday evening, and then now it's night. Which word do they want to use? But the stories start to change as people try to find their way of saying it without just, piggybacking off of the other person. But his story has to be told. The rally held at the scene where Jacob Blake was shot was organized by the Lake County, Illinois Black Lives Matter chapter. So those people who say, where was Black Lives Matter? You now know it's Lake County that has a response team that can get there, but they do not have the resources to prevent crime in the first place. But how they tell his story, activist Clyde McLemore, who led that large crowd in anti-police chants outside of the Kenosha County Courthouse on Monday, August 24th, 2020 in Kenosha, Wisconsin. This was, I think, CNN, right? I don't know. We'll get to it. Who was activist Clyde? Oh, that's just Clyde, they would say. That's Clyde. And there's much that we can say about Clyde, the organizer, and probably more than should be included on a quick screenshot of the brother. But that's Clyde. And so if you want to know, ask. And Clyde answers. He'll talk to you. He'll tell you all about it. But it was that ability to organize that essentially led to this small victory in the recognition of humanity, but it's still one that we needed to happen with the right nowness. See, so what happened was, after he got shot like 7 times, he was still the one handcuffed as they were doing, maybe as or maybe after or during the process, maybe some anesthesia put him to sleep. We don't know the details of that hospital ride. We don't know the details of that hospitalization experience, but it was captured that he was handcuffed and they wanted him released from them handcuffs. And in fact, they wanted him out of the custody of the police who had just tried to kill him. And so they came together and they went all the way to the courthouse where the demand needed to be made, and they wanted to have the conversation. That conversation was met with resistance. I want you to zoom in here, because this story on August 26th takes a twist. Whereas Black Lives Matter became a target. And some folks were choosing sides. That made the situation even more volatile for Clyde. All right. And what we know to be true is confirmed through the Huffington Post article where white vigilantes have always had a friend in police, published by Christopher Matthews, that says it was seen familiar in American history. Agents of the state conscripting armed white vigilantes to help violently suppress movements for racial justice and liberation. Cops and the Klan go hand in hand. That's a protest chant. Yeah, they were making it more volatile for Clyde. On August 26th, where the story tends to get hijacked, there was a published work by many on this active shooter. And the story is being undertold or undersold because there were multiple active shooters that night. This is the one that they document because of the very favorable right to walk away that this person received, that our brother Jacob Blake was not afforded. No, he was not afforded the dignity or the respect or the courtesy to just get in the car and leave and to get out of a hostile situation. But that August 26th, with hands up after committing those murders, kid looking to submit himself to authority or for law or for the justice system to determine, was allowed to just walk away. But the brother who was there to resolve a conflict and determined to get his kids out of that situation was not afforded said right. And so what ensued would be a series of demonstrations, some peaceful, others, well, not so peaceful anymore. And in this sharing of how his story is being told, justice for Jacob Blake will make sense if you ask about Clyde, who started that chapter there after a police or officer involved shooting of a 17-year-old named Justice. Let that sink in for a second. And if you can't appreciate that response, then maybe some of these are more your liking. The Wisconsin Department of Justice is vigorously and thoroughly investigating yesterday's officer-involved shooting in Kenosha. They use two big words, vigorously and thoroughly, that they can be held to account on, but only if we take the time to document the process. That was according to Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Call. Wisconsin, I don't even know how to say that word. What is that? Is that named after an Indian or a Native American? Wisconsin? Not sure. I didn't even have like a clue of where Wisconsin was in proximity to Chicago as to why they kept making the reference. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh, you're talking about walking distance, maybe 30 minutes drive, a good walk, maybe a slight jog. But since it's Wisconsin, a Wisconsin city where cops shot a black father several times, a Wisconsin city where cops shot a black father several times in the back as he entered a vehicle with his children inside. I'm gonna let that sit in and breathe my way through it, because this is how they tell his story. And this morning, the nation wakes up yet again with grief and outrage that yet another Black American is the victim of excessive force. The former vice president said in a statement, "This calls for an immediate, full, and transparent investigation, and the officers must be held accountable." And so they marched. And during the daytime, it seemed to be a peaceful demonstration, whereas it was very multicultural, including biracial and multi-ethnic. I have no good words for Daniel Cameron. I'm sorry I included, I know why I included this one in the slide, because Fred T. Joseph on Twitter was actually able to respond almost as fast as Ben Crump in shedding light on Jacob Blake's story. And Frederick Joseph captured Clyde's involvement in organizing Black Lives Matter for rapid deployment. There we go. That's as concise as I can think it to say it. But don't call me a Marxist. Under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. That's Karl Marx. Any attempt to harm the workers must be frustrated by force if necessary. That's Karl Marx. And so I gotta teach a little bit, because this is how they tell his story. They said the protests and property damage that followed the Kenosha, Wisconsin police shooting of Jacob Blake followed a tragically familiar national pattern until two protesters were shot and killed. Allegedly, senior-year-old militia member has been charged as an adult with 1 count each of intentional homicide and reckless homicide for the August 25th shooting. He is also charged with attempted intentional homicide for the shooting of a third man. Rittenhouse is awaiting extradition from Illinois. And so if you thought I was just rambling, I was not, when I was saying I didn't really know Wisconsin is it Native American, that all of that is really still the battle for Lake Michigan right now. And it's like 30 minutes driving today, but it's still walking distance. And so they marched. And those Kenosha protests continued into a second night. On the second night of protests there in Kenosha, the burn this motherfucker down came to fruition. It was not so peaceful. As they said, the police arrived with the pepper spray and the projectiles and the rubber bullets and the willingness to enact a certain level of force against the workers, the walkers, the people, the protesters, the agitators, so many ways to characterize them. But an 8 p.m. curfew was put into effect in the city of Kenosha because of it. Outside agitators, they called them, but let's stick with how they tell his story. It says Kenosha, Wisconsin. An officer-involved shooting investigation is underway in Kenosha on Sunday, August 23rd. A large crowd took to the street to protest following the shooting. It happened near 28th Avenue and 40th Street around 5:11 p.m. after officers were called for a domestic incident. According to police, officers provided immediate aid to the person after the shooting. The person was transported via Flight for Life to Foughton, Milwaukee, in serious condition. Graphic video of the shooting is circulating on social media. People at the scene told CBS 58 the victim is a man and a father. I know he's got kids and a girl. I never had a problem with him. I always see him every day. Parks right behind me on the street. said Aaron, a neighbor. It goes back to Emmett Till. We're tired of it. Rodney King. We're tired of it. And right now, this is the wrong generation that this is happening to. The frustration is boiling to the top and we're sick and tired, said Clyde McLemore, Black Lives Matter of Lake County, Illinois. Lake County Sheriff John Eidelberg on the right, and Al Rogers, a co-founder of the Lake County chapter of Black Lives Matter, talk at the opening of the organization's office. That was about 5 years ago. That's Al. And so not only are you making it more volatile for Clyde, you make it more volatile for Al, as well as the Lake County Sheriff. So my first contention, White's recording isn't a Democratic political stunt. What we're really up against here is a number of statements. Police Chief Dan Miskinis, Pete Dietz, president of the Kenosha Professional Police Association, the Wisconsin DOJ DCI statement, which is supposed to be vigorous and thoroughly investigated, Major General Paul Knapp, who leave it, and then in the blue are the actual Democrats. So again, my first contention, White's recording isn't a Democratic political stunt. Jacob Blake, the man who filmed the shooting, that's Rayshawn White, and it's White's recording, and that's not fake. That's not a stunt. That's not drumming up race problems in America. And so that's not how we tell his story. I mean, unless you're like one of those Black conservatives, the story that is being untold has multiple sections, and one of them include this right here. Couple of screen grabs that just showed the two officers, and it doesn't show their statements though. So everybody else is held to account to tell what happened, except the people who are supposedly, what are they reserving their right to remain silent? The police association can come out though, and that's secondary information. The attorney of that and the president came out and they made statements. Dan Miskinis, whatever his name is, it doesn't sound Black. That guy can make a statement, and that secondary information wasn't even there. But the two that were are not held on account. So what do we have? We have an unequal weighing of testimony skewed towards secondary information on their side and a traumatized eyewitness on ours. It's just unequal in the eyes of the law. This is how we have to tell his story. And these are the people who are telling his story. What we see on our side of the scale is a GoFundMe for the mother and family that exceeded $1 million because of activism. Yes, it did. That Ben Crump tweet helped a lot. Fred T. Joseph's tweet helped a lot. The media jumping in with their sensational journalism and the ones that were trying their best to humanize this and not skip to the Kyle Rittenhouse stories so fast. Those ones who understood that this was a father and who wanted to know what happened and thus asked the people there primary statements. Those ones matter. But in the eyes of the law, we have the emphatic secondary support of a political process, democratically leaning Lieutenant Governor Barnes and his statements. We have those Attorney Ben Crump tweets early on, which are secondary. The Father's March on Washington footage was Classic in the telling of this. You can still see the pain therein as he gave his words. There are the charges on Kyle that are going to be a bit of a distraction, but still connected. And then there are the officers on paid leave, but not required to have issued their official statement. All right. It is important that we have these conversations because there are still those who forget that Blake is not on trial. Officer Shesky, Kyle, and others should be. And that's what they're determining. And to be able to determine that at some point, this vigorous and thorough investigation will have to compare statements made by these officers that they put on paid leave rather than prison. Statements then, on the other side, as they tell his story, Police Chief Dan Miskinnis. I'm going to leave it right here and jump back and see if there's anyone who has joined in the chat for a quick shout out. I do need a quick break there. The information is hot. The information is heavy, but this is the telling of his story. And so it's important that we find the time, make the time, and do what we got to do. So let me see here. Salute to the five that are still rocking in the chat. I appreciate you for coming through. How they write his story is why I'm showing the screenshot so you can see it for yourself. How they tell his story is important because that is the court cases. And so stick with us here as this information gets even more evolved. I'm going to take a quick sip. As we come up on 30 minutes after the hour, appreciate you. And let's get back into this information. The reason why we here. I love that song. I wish I had them high notes though. What a segue. Black militias are guarding black-owned businesses with automatic rifles. There was a picture there on Twitter that showed it, Zoomer clips. The armed civilians aren't just protecting property. They're also using their Second Amendment rights to bolster their First Amendment right to protest. This was May 28, 2020. A man who calls himself the official Grandmaster J, it's unclear whether this is a nickname or just a social media handle, leads a group called the Not Fucking Around Coalition, in fact. And let's get back to the information. So in statements made by Police Chief Dan Miskinnis, he was asked, the question was why that damn kid who had just murdered two people and severely or seriously injured a third was allowed to walk away surrendering themselves. And in his response, this is what he said. I may have forget the order, but in standout, I have a video that I could share, but I know they get real finicky about the videos. So I tried to taper some of that. But his statements included references to, there were 50 people arrested, one in possession of a flamethrower. Says there were a lot of people in the area, a lot of people with weapons, and unfortunately, a lot of gunfire. What the officers were driving into was a shots fired complaint, not a shooting, not a person down complaint. They're responding to that. They see someone walking toward them with their hands up. And so the media then called bullshit, and they showed the footage offered by the Rundown. It was a live stream that was happening during the event, and a live stream similar to the one that Facebook was reported 455 times as the militia on that side was calling to arms all arms needed. And it was reported 55 times. They're calling all arms to this location, and they're doing it and broadcasting it live on Facebook. This is probably bad. And they were reporting it that the live stream was up. And yet even automated robots and real moderators, they said in the report around 4 moderators said it did not violate the terms of Facebook. And so they allowed the call to arms to go out, and volunteers actually showed up. Now, there was no way of connecting, as they said here or in their statement. Mark Zuckerberg released a state or didn't release a statement, but had a meeting. And somehow somebody grabbed that information of Mark Zuckerberg's meeting. I didn't grab it, but it was grabbed. And on that meeting, they talked about why the system failed and why that call to arms was not a stream interrupted. And from that stream to another stream, that information was captured in how we tell, or how his story is being told. But not just Dan Miskinnis with everything that he said was going on. The governor was also questioned. Same thing. And his response, not a firm and authoritative response, but his response, then the governor said he saw the same thing and was concerned and would like to disinvite all of the people running around with long guns for no apparent reason to stay home. So the 2 things that I pulled out there, number 1, he saw the same thing. So that is a confirmation of the videos Of course, secondary, he wasn't actually there on the ground when the arrest was not made of Kyle Rittenhouse. Neither was he on the ground of the detainment process against our brother Jacob Blake. But in that aftermath, as the protests then built momentum and people started to pick sides, something happened that made the governor say he would like to disinvite. See, he was being asked about the shooting of Jacob Blake, and he was responding that, he was shot around 7 or 8 times. But it seems that he was more or less briefed on Kyle Rittenhouse, more so than on those officers. They were put on paid leave, is probably what he was told. Nothing more, maybe less. But was he told that Jacob Blake's 3 sons were in the back of the car when the police shot him? Record Eagle was one of the first with the AP photos of the officers involved in the shooting. Those photos of those officers was released by the Wisconsin Department of Justice. This could be interpreted as a sign of goodwill and transparency. This is one of the earliest public statements from the Kenosha Police Union. According to Insider, Jacob Blake's 3 sons were in the back of the car when the police shot him. A friend said it was one of the boys' birthdays. And so, primary information from primary sources is going to have to be weighed and evaluated against secondary information, but do not put Jacob Blake on trial. These are the defendants. In an officer-involved shooting incident, the Department of Justice and DCI investigates their actions. They're investigating their actions for whether a crime was committed, and can their crime be proven beyond reasonable doubt. Until they are proven not guilty, these are the bad guys, not Jacob Blake. Remember, this is a man, a father, going to resolve a dispute. Get my sons out. The witness said he told his son to go get in a truck, and it's his son's birthday party, and 2 women are in an altercation, it sounds like. For some odd reason, he's the one that's not supposed to be there, and so he's getting his sons and he's leaving. But some where along the line, these officers determined that force was necessary against him, the guy resolving the dispute by walking away. Dan Miskinis, the police chief, says 50 people were arrested, one in possession of a flamethrower. And it's not to investigate the flamethrower guy, but to think they can put hands on our brother. So that protest chant, the cops and the Klan go hand in hand, is stories being published against the US police, calling for police reform with the allegations and proven with data that white supremacists and militias have infiltrated police across the United States. Our FBI agent has documented links between serving officers and racist militant activities in more than a dozen states. And this is the battle for Lake Michigan. And the antagonist, who does not get much but to say that the photo was released by his side because he is the criminal under investigation right now until proven not guilty. If you're in his defense, you say it's until he is innocent until proven guilty. But if you know that he is the criminal or the antagonist in this, then you call it like you see it. The same way that with Kyle Rittenhouse, it's not homicide, you say murder. And then you also say there were multiple active shooters there. August 26th, and how we tell his story, a full statement from the Milwaukee Bucks was also published. And we can click on that link, because it wasn't just the officers and it wasn't just Ben Crump, but it was also big business and that players union and how we write his story, which is history. Those people who were standing out there, heartbroken, many of them probably could have only hoped for a Ben Crump tweet. Tag him, tag him, tag him. Do something, because this story has to be told. And on the other side, in the telling of his story, there is that distraction case again that will undoubtedly be linked in the telling of Jacob Blake from now into eternity. And in that telling, the statement released from someone claiming to be an attorney representing Rittenhouse, published by the Associated Press, where they called Kyle an innocent boy who justifiably exercised his fundamental right of self-defense. And that same statement, remove Kyle, replace boy, we don't like that statement. Jacob Blake was innocent, is innocent, who justifiably exercised his fundamental right to self-defense. And in doing so, he was likely saving his boys, except the dangerous racial profiling of Officer Shesky, two others. But let's point it out again. on Tuesday night. So it happened Sunday. And this is the statements that's being released and how they tell his story and how they write it. He spoke to a reporter from the Daily Caller news site. This is Rittenhouse. This statement from the shooter, who they boy exercising his fundamental right to self-defense. That shooter was published on He said, people are getting injured and our job is to protect this business, Rittenhouse said. And part of my job is to also help people. Somebody hurt, I'm running into harm's way. That's why I have my rifle. They gave the source, said he spoke to a reporter from the Daily. He said this is actually his statement. He said he was running into harm's way and he is accused. Now let's juxtaposition that with what Miskinus says. He says 50 people were arrested, one in possession of a flamethrower. And because of that, that's why the kid holding his hands up with an AR-15 model rifle, surrendering himself, was allowed. Also in his defense, a statement released by the National Foundation for Gun Rights. They called Rittenhouse a law-abiding teenager who had the right to defend himself. Executive Director Dudley Brown told the Chicago Tribune the organization hadn't even spoken with the Rittenhouse family. So, this is tertiary at this point. They said that Brown case, or that Rittenhouse case, it isn't perfect. But he said that kid has a strong self because he believes the people Rittenhouse shot pursued him first. There were numerous video clips posted online that appear to show Rittenhouse at the scene Tuesday night, including several that show shootings and their aftermath. The videos also indicated that he before the shootings, despite being out past curfew and a year too young to carry a gun openly in Wisconsin. And so they called him a law-abiding teenager. The National Foundation for Gun Rights, this is their executive director. And they made their statement public that he was law-abiding and had the right to defend himself with said rifle. And Jacob Blake doesn't, they said, not seeing him as a threat. Kenosha Police Chief defends the officers who let the alleged shooter go by. That was published by the Washington Examiner. Then Kenosha mayor said he would not seek the resignation of the police chief sheriff, which is a demand made by that same organization of Black Lives Matter. And he was like, nope, we will not force him to resign. Says the Kenosha police reject accusations of assistance from armed vigilantes. I'll show you. Because I don't have to just say it. We have to have the sources. And this is the City of Kenosha Police Department and their media release on August 26th. It says on August 25th, 2020 at about 11:45 p.m., Kenosha Police, along with assisting agencies, they called them. Let me back it up. I'm trying to teach slow, but we got to teach. Question was, why was he allowed to leave the scene? The guy made a statement that he was finna run in there, and that's why he got his rifle. They called him a law-abiding teenager, even though he was out past curfew and did not have the right to open carry in Wisconsin, where he was. They said he talked to police before and ran out there and did it, and on his way out, he lifted his hands and they allowed him to walk away. Police chief, as well as the Gun Rifle Association, or whatever you call them jerks, they said he was doing the right thing and that he had the right to defend himself. Interesting. They reject accusations of assistance from the armed vigilantes. What? One more time. They reject accusations of assistance from armed vigilantes. And then on the media release, August 26, 2020 statement, they say on August 25th, 2020 at about 11:45 p.m., Kenosha police, along with, say it with me, assisting agencies. All right, so if you don't believe me, these are the stories and how they tell his story. Let's see this one. I think I blew that one. Whose story is this? During the investigation following the initial incident, Mr. Blake admitted that he had a knife in his possession. DCI agents, which is the Department of Justice Division of Criminal Investigations, those agents recovered a knife from the driver's side floorboard of Mr. Blake's vehicle. A search of the vehicle located no additional weapons. They don't have body cameras, so they weren't able to see that or say where are the body cam footage. So let me get this straight. 50 were arrested, 1 in possession of a flamethrower. And the man with the knife is the biggest threat. I say that the governor, lieutenant governor, that's the Democrat leaning, but you never really know. This guy, the governor, Evers, I get mixed signals from as well, because when entertaining a few questions, Evers was asked about Jacob being handcuffed to the hospital bed, and the governor replied he would have no understanding of why the handcuffs would be necessary for Jacob Blake, having paid a horrific price already, having been shot 7 or 8 times in the back. He said they should find a better way to have him get better and recover. It seems counterintuitive and bad medicine and bad restraining. As he weighs the constitutional freedoms against the civil unrest in Kenosha, he expresses concern and anguish at the thought of what's to come. But he has seemingly contradictory sentiments in favor of the people's rights to peacefully assemble and protest. And some of that is referenced in his remarks about the people attending the protest. When he shared his views towards the arrival of concerned citizens from outside Kenosha, he referred to them as agitators. And it may have seemed like I was just rambling and things, but when I said at first I didn't know the distance between Wisconsin and Chicago and why they kept saying Chicago and why it was important, till I looked at the map to see how close it was, which is how close are they, is the question. Why do they keep saying, well, black on black crime in Chicago? And they keep saying, well, where's Black Lives Matter for black on black crime in Chicago? And it's because the distance between where that Black Lives Matter chapter and Clyde and Al and where they operate their building in front of that courthouse there in Wakuka or whatever you call it, it's definitely a Native American name. But where that is, their space is walking distance from where the incident occurred. Now it's about a 30-minute drive but it's still a walk and a walking distance. And so the march is important, and they didn't do a good job capturing the essence of the march, but they did do a good job of slandering and overriding the story of Jacob Blake. And it happened because of language like agitators. But I would still call them both Democratic and Democratic leaning. Wisconsin Governor Evers, Lieutenant Governor Barnes look forward toward rebuilding of Kenosha, and they stated a reform of broken systems was needed. That came from Chicago staff, CBS 2. Look at some of their hashtags, and that's what led me to this documentation series on his story. And yes, Lieutenant Governor Mandela does kind of look like Matt Barnes a little bit. They could be cousins. Keep it in context. I'm going to take a quick break. Let me get back to the chat and make sure that we still got at least rocking. If we got at least one rocking, then it lets me know that the information is valuable. So let's see here. I got my brother Craig Harper in the building rocking with the kids. So I appreciate you for showing up, man. Black business is important. And I remember marching through Atlanta on one of my first visits there as a Morehouse, before I became a Morehouse man, but came from California, family in the back of a truck. And we got to Atlanta, Georgia. And in Atlanta, it seemed like we were greeted the day we got there with a parade. It didn't happen like that, but in my mind, in my narcissistic mind, Brother Craig Harper, that's what I saw with my eyes, was a parade the day that I arrived. And so thank you for being a Black businessman in Atlanta, and thank you for rocking with B1 Brother Moses. So the reasons that we hear, the reasons that we're, hey, that song right there makes so much sense. And so to keep it in context on my break, remember the context. In fact, previously gathered in the Georgia neighborhood where Ahmaud Arbery was shot and killed by two white residents while unarmed and out jogging. So you got George Floyd and you got Ahmaud Arbery. I told you about Young Justice, 17-year-old who was shot in the back, and the reason why Clyde and Al came together for that Black woman who lost her son, and why the chapter was started in the first place in North Chicago. And its distance of about 30 minutes of a drive, but walking distance from where this next incident occurred, the attempted murder of Jacob Blake. And this is how they write his story, and our job as Black media to make sure they get it right. Let's look at the things they say about our brother, and let's look at them in context. I'm Kingian, so that B1 perspective matters. Give you a quick recap of where we're at. They ambushed the conversation because the protest started happening, and now they got to respond. That tweet was heard around the world from attorney Ben Crump, and it was pushed by Black activists like Al and Clyde. And that march started off peaceful and nonviolent. By night 2, the burning happened. The pepper spray and all of that you saw in the news, once it was too late to say sorry. There were calls and demands made on both sides, one saying, release the information, the other saying, come take it. And so they showed up at the building and the space and said, release the information. And so back and forth they went, and found out that Brother Jacob Blake was, after being shot 7 times in the back, handcuffed to the bed. They said, unhandcuff him. And the governor said, I don't know why they would have him handcuffed, uncuffing. The storyline about Jacob Blake was hijacked with the white supremacy narrative that actually happened. where white militia groups rallied via Facebook. And they said a call to arms is needed in Wisconsin. And while I don't know whether Wisconsin is named after an Indian, I can tell you that it's about 30 minutes away from where our brother Clyde was also saying, Black Lives Matter and let's come together. And though the community agreed with Brother Clyde, there are people who disagreed. And those people then said, we will come and protect the businesses in a similar fashion to the Not Fucking Around Coalition. In statements made by the police chief who defends the shooting, in both the shooting of Jacob Blake and the shooter walking away freely from the police officers after the murders of protesters. He defends the shooters. That officer says why they didn't arrest or detain Kyle as he was walking away. He said there were 50 people arrested and one was detained with a flamethrower, in possession of a flamethrower. One in the possession of a flamethrower. One with a flamethrower that was peacefully arrested, unharmed, and unshot. And a flamethrower in the hands of a white militiaman, or this pseudo acronym called Antifa, which relates to some mad white boy. And all of that. The most dangerous was the black man with a knife. And so the story was hijacked and spun, and it continues to be spun to put our brother Jacob Blake on trial. He says there were a lot of people in the area, a lot of people with weapons, and unfortunately a lot of gunfire. So when I told you active shooters in that scenario, it's true. Because by 8 p.m., the curfew was enacted, and it was too late to say sorry. It's what happens when dangerous racial profiling occurs. Wisconsin Lieutenant Governor said the state does not need a visit from 45. And while those 4.5s may be necessary in self-defense, 4.5s can also be a more dangerous weapon than a knife. And in a situation where racial profiling becomes dangerous, self-defense is a defense for Jacob Blake, but he's not on trial. The people also said we absolutely don't need Trump's planned visit to Kenosha, Wisconsin. And as you see the family members of Jacob Blake marching with supporters, oh, they were going to the building. Now, I've heard people say this has nothing to do with us, the second half of the story, which is the Kyle Rittenhouse, but that's where I would say they are wrong and they are misinformed and that they are missing a critical element in this conversation, which is the state-sanctioned violence against humans. Say humans. Because in this case, the state would be the authorization to kill if so rendered as an order from the one 100,000 National Guard who are already there. You feel me? And so while that 45 is good for self-defense, it probably, in most cases, would not have been well received as an alternative for Jacob Blake's knife. All right, so I wrote this and I want you to rock with me. It says, for our grievances to be addressed, we've continued to seek assistance from the government through the political process. Statistics show incomparable data on how voting benefited, but there are examples. Ironically, we are often resolved with platitudes, with feeling as if our voices were heard and therefore gradual change is accepted. We resolve for tokenism, having that representative look like us, whether their minds are black first or not. They got melanin, benefit of the doubt is afforded. And we often resolve for symbolism, which is the appearance or the illusion of a victory, like unhandcuffing him and releasing him from the shackles while he's in the hospital, but also the recalling of the warrant that was issued in his name by whomever it was they said. Stop right there. It was assessed at 12:20 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday on 8/31, a petition. And I bring it up because it was used as an example for leveraging the proper political process to address any grievance with social conditions as a concerned citizen. I remember it personally, those petitions, because I use public transportation. And using public transportation, there was a hub where you change over. You get to that hub and you're either going northbound, eastbound, westbound. And at that hub, a lot of people converged. And so you would find people with petitions, almost like you see the Census Bureau people out today. You see them with petitions, sign the petition. This is what we're advocating for. And those petitions, if they get enough signatures, become tools of the political process. A Karen, Paula Wazinski, claimed the governor has proven to be unfit for office. She makes a case that he has exercised gross negligence in his COVID response and mentions the word incompetence. She will need about 670,000 signatures in 60 days to prompt a recall election. Her bill is opposed by the Wisconsin Democratic Party. And for that reason, I think the Wisconsin Democratic Party Governor Evers is mostly Democratic. He has a little bit of a response. In order to enact change and using that tool of petitions, he released a statement. How we write his story, how they tell his story. Governor Evers releases a statement on special session. Madison. Governor Tony Evers today released the following statement on the special session on policing accountability and transparency reform. He says, the people of Wisconsin don't want another task force or more delays. They want action and results, and they want it today, not tomorrow or someday months down the road. It's disappointing that there's no sense of urgency from Republicans, and it's a letdown to all the people who are asking us to lead. We have been talking about these bills for months, and Republicans have had plenty of time to consider them on the merits. I encourage Wisconsinites to contact their elected officials and ask them to show up and get to work to pass these bills. We don't have time to wait, end quote, Governor Evers. Woo! He tried to hit him with that heat, didn't he? That almost sounds like a claim for restorative justice or reparations. Reparations now. He said they don't want another task force. Sounds like the debates against the HR 40. You need to study and develop proposals for. Nah, don't want another task force or more delays. He came out with a heated statement. He said that meeting lasted about 30 minutes. But he made that statement just like the Milwaukee Brewers and the Cincinnati Reds, who said the players from the Brewers and Reds have decided to not play tonight's baseball game. With our community and our nation in such pain, we wanted to draw as much attention to the issues that really matter, especially racial injustice and systemic oppression, August 26th. So you're canceling basketball, Players Association, and I didn't even know there was a Players Association in baseball, but it appears that they too are siding with the people. 1,000 National Guardsmen were there, boots on the ground, and Major General Paul Knapp released his statement and said, we are on a state active duty. So a curfew is enacted, 8 p.m. The National Guard shows up 1,000 boots on the ground strong. When you look at the information, one would conclude that assisting agencies, if specific to the National Guard, would have just said we had 1,000 National Guardsmen there. The reason why assisting agencies was used as language is because it had to give probable deniability to whom those assisting agencies were. But you already have 1,000 National Guard, boots on the ground, state active duty, according to the Major General. Statements released on his story. I led because there are those who say I'm getting tired of the Democratic Party drumming up these same issues every 4 years, taking advantage of the Black vote and doing absolutely nothing to fix our communities, then expecting us to vote for them again. They think this is a Democratic failure when there are probably two. And even there, the white and the biracial have no power as governor and lieutenant governor over whether assisting agencies can come into the community as either agitators or in defense of, those they're in defense of, or against those who they're in defense of, or in support of. No power to stop any of them, and no way of differentiating the who's who standing right in front of them in their community. So many people shooting, according to Dan Miskinis, the police chief, and one with a flamethrower. And all of that mass hysteria during a multiple active shooter scenario, and they don't know the difference between who's who. And yet, those same far right are drumming up a story. And because I don't just give information without the proper sources, this is from the Department of Military Affairs, A quick segue, but related, it says the F-35 Alpha Lightning IIs assigned to the 134th Fighter Squadron, Vermont Air National Guard, sit on the flight line after a day of flying training mission at Northern Lightning 2020, Volk Field, Wisconsin, August 11th, 2020. Elements of the 158th Fighter Wing deployed to the annual exercise that gives the wing and aircraft training in deploying and conducting combat missions in a joint environment. Slow that down. They out there training aerial combat missions in Wisconsin, August 11th, 2020. It's an annual exercise, very popular. It's very credible where they're going at Volk, the Northern Lightning event. It says that F-35A Lightning, so you see that, Lightning IIs, those are the feature. It was joined by the F-22 Raptors, the F-18 Super Hornets, and F-16 Fighting Falcons. Those are some bad boys. I tell you, those are bad boys, all of them. And they were all sitting there August 11th, 2020. United States Air National Guard photo illustration by Tech Sergeant Ryan Campbell. Image created by blending a series of multiple exposures. Excuse me, I skipped a line because in Black YouTube, we often hear of being flew out. And I laugh at it, but this is more or less up my lane when we talk about being flew out, where the F-35A Lightning is a bad motherfucker. Yes, it is. And the F-22 Raptor is a bad motherfucker. And the F-18 Super Hornet is a bad motherfucker. And the F-16 Fighting Falcon is a bad motherfucker. And you put all of them in combination right there in Wisconsin, about 30 minutes away, walking distance, driving distance, excuse me, but it's worth the walk if you want to march and protest. And I tell you, it says that August 11th, 2020, they were there in nearly a month-long exercise. Assessed at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 8/31/2020. August 24th, 2020, Wisconsin National Guard to support the local law enforcement in Kenosha. So this is the 24th. It happened on the 23rd, and the National Guard, I'm telling you, was there because they had Northern Lightning going on with all of these bad motherfuckers sitting 30 minutes drive, but a pretty good walk away. But they have Volk. It says Volk Field Combat Readiness Training Center was hosting Joint Air National Guard combat readiness training exercises known as the Northern Lightning. One of 7 of those CRTCs, Combat Readiness Training Center, which is hosting combat readiness training exercises. It says the exercise is focused on 4th and 5th generation aircraft integration in complex threat environments. Major Matthew Wonderland. August 24th. It says Northern Lightning exercise concludes at Volk Field, Air Force, Army, Navy, and Air National Guard assets potentially still on the ground. The best of the best pilots who concluded their combat readiness exercise on August 24th, right up the street, but still there, Wisconsin National Guard there, 1,000. But it was Kyle's job to run into harm's way? Excuse me. Make that make sense. Because what you're up against is actually that far right and its deep state, what they call it, associations with white nationalists, and they're unapologetic about it, but receiving cover. It says on August 24th, 2020, Wisconsin National Guard continues statewide COVID-19 testing this week to once again confirm they were already there. And you may not believe me, so we grab the screenshots and then we make sure we make that information plain. I bolded it, this by Major Matthew Wonderland, August 24th, 2020, to show you the date that the best of the best were already there. So do not let them tell you anything different. Now, as you visit that base, there's a couple of things you're going to have to go through if you are an actual certified and authorized visitor. One of them is a briefing, and that briefing includes anti-terrorism. It says terrorism is defined as. And before I go into it, I'm gonna take another drink and check the chat, see who's still rocking with us here today. I told you this is the telling of his story, and there's some things that probably weren't stated that have to be said, but we gonna rock out, man. So peace of salute, B. Seal Senior. I thank you for coming and rocking with us here on the stream here today. We got to let you know, man, this is how they write his story. I'm showing you their screenshots. I don't have the rights to them. It's all rights reserved, but we have to do a critique of that information, and the information that is there is ours to tell about. And if they still want their rights, they can have them. And just like they say, the copyright or whatever it is, if that's how they want to play the game, then so be it. I did a poor job with my intellectual journalism of actually capturing the who's who on publishing all the information, but hopefully you see it on the screen and you know that it's there. And so I'm going to keep it in context with this break as I take another sip. The arrival of militia members and armed private citizens is to be expected in cities where there is intense fallout from fatal use of force incidents. I tell you, it's the reason that we here, the reason why we fill our paper on. See, I can't remember that song because I only remember the remix by E40, man. It says, Black activists, some inspired by the likes of Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, are using their guns to remind the public that they too have a voice. Let's get back to this information. Stay focused. And so, from this current slide, as a visitor, an authorized visitor, they have the National Guard there in 1,000, the best pilots who have just gotten done a month combat readiness training in complex threat environments. And so these pilots, these bad motherfuckers, and about 1,000 others were called under the command of that General Knapp. And when defended by the police chief, they said, nah, man. When it came to alleged, and then we'll keep going, because the visitor's training includes a definition of terrorism, the calculated use of violence or the threat of violence to inculcate fear, intended to coerce or intimidate governments or societies in the pursuit of goals that are generally political, religious, or ideological. And they give the DOD definition. And we're talking about investigators from the DOJ and so forth with the acronyms like DCI or OIS. Although this is only a brief overview, this information will help increase your awareness and possibly aid military members, not militia members, but military members, as well as local and federal law enforcement in preemptively dealing with terrorism. What to report? Surveillance, someone recording or monitoring activities. This may include the use of cameras, either still or video, note-taking, drawing diagrams, annotating on maps, or using binoculars or other vision-enhancing devices, such as the guy who shows up acting like he's cleaning graffiti off the wall, but monitoring all activities of a sector of society known as the Black community, because Black Lives Matter. Elicitation. It says people or organizations attempting to gain information about military operations, capabilities, or people. Examples could include being asked about what's happening at the base, getting troop strength numbers, or the number of airplanes on that base. Test of security. Any attempts to measure reaction times to security breaches or to penetrate physical security barriers or procedures in order to assess strengths and weaknesses. Example, they say a person grabs the base fence and shakes it and sees how long it takes for police to respond. Example, we say when they drive a truck onto a bridge or down a ramp, up the street in Charlottesville. Acquiring supplies, purchasing or stealing explosives, weapons, ammunition, detonators, timers, etc. also includes acquiring military uniforms, decal, flight manuals, passes, or badges, or the equipment to manufacture such items or any other controlled items. You mean like that water bottle they threw, Kyle? Supplies. And then it says suspicious persons out of place, people who don't seem to belong in the workplace, neighborhood, business establishment, or anywhere else. This category is hard to define, but the point is that people know what looks right and what doesn't look right in their neighborhoods, office spaces, commutes, etc. If a person just doesn't seem like he or she belongs, there's probably a reason for that. Suspicious persons. Dry run. Putting people into position and moving them around according to their plan without actually committing the terrorist act. This activity could also include mapping out routes and determining the timing or traffic flow. Take note of people moving around from place to place without any apparent purpose and doing it perhaps many times. Deploying assets. People and supplies getting in position to commit the act. This is your last opportunity to alert authorities before a terrorist act occurs. Look for people loading up vehicles with weaponry, explosives, etc., and or parking that vehicle somewhere, or people in military uniforms who don't look right, approaching an installation or getting into a vehicle, or people who seem out of place standing by at a certain location as if waiting for something to happen. And then they go on to say what to do. They say, remember to protect yourself first. This is what they give the visitors who are going to be assisting the military. They say, do not confront the person. Do not tamper with suspicious looking packages. Do not disturb suspicious objects. If you suspect anything suspicious, you should be prepared to give a description of the person, gender, race, height, weight, age, clothing, the mode of transportation, type, color, make, and model, the type of suspicious activity, surveillance, elicitation, etc., location of suspicious activity, including the address, the building, the street, and all of that, etc. And then they say who to contact on the base. They say call 911. So many ironies in this, but this is how visitors are advised to practice good risk management in the field. And so it's necessary to show those MRAPs and to show the conversation that they were actually having with this kid who was definitely out of place. If you can see on your screen in this Black community, people standing around. See, there was folks inside the Black media who said this had nothing to do with Blacks, but unfortunately, this was the policing or the militarized policing that was occurring on one of those blocks where Black people were gathered. And yes, there was Black people and others, and yes, there were blocks that were more exclusively other than Blacks represented on those blocks before and after curfew. And at this time, it is nighttime and it is after 8 p.m. We see the 17-year-old who is not authorized to open carry in Wisconsin receiving direction and communicating with men operating the vehicles and equipment of the military and the authorities. And in these communications, this young man seems to not be being received as a threat. Of course not. Not with the detaining of an individual with a flamethrower by comparison, but this not a threat with a long rifle and military looking attire and military looking armaments. And so forth. By every rule in the visitor's guide, it does not seem that he received a proper briefing from the National Guard or General Knapp's troops. Doesn't seem like he was held to the standard of General Knapp's troops because they were there using pepper spray and other non-lethal force projectiles and subduing perpetrators of what they would consider offenses with less than lethal force. And if you believe the story of Officer Dan Miskinis that says that there were 50 arrested and that there were many shots fired, it wasn't a singular incident, but there were many shootings occurring. If you believe that story, then you could also believe that there was a threat assessment being made. And that threat assessment being made required that at this location, there should be MRAPs, or mine-resistant, armor-plated, whatever you call them, protective vehicles. Armored vehicles needed to be on this block. And in this policing, we draw to your attention that same concept being pushed by the media. We'll tell you that the government is complicit, but it is the infiltration of the military or the buddy-buddy relationship between them and the far right. And we recall images like this, where the armed members of a militia group gathered at Michigan's Capitol building in April, ahead of a vote on the extension of the governor's emergency declaration, stay-at-home order due to the coronavirus. And while we wouldn't identify that governor there in the Battle of Lake Michigan, while we wouldn't identify them as being Democratic, we do see that this picture was taken inside the building with the security standing by, legs crossed, unfazed. But we got to show them. We can't just tell them. And so that's Reuters' Seth Harold, looks like, who published this work. And because we bring facts, I talked about it. Facebook was used as a medium or as equipment to broadcast a message that aided in abetting what any other rational person would call a terrorist attack, with multiple active shooter scenarios occurring. The story on the other side tries to paint it in a different way. There was a live stream, and the channel was shut down afterwards. But there was a live stream, and the president of that white militia group came to speak out about it. Talked about the police shooting and the fallout, and why the Kenosha Guard, as they called themselves, was called out. Why they were rallied, and why there was a call to arm published Fact check. USA Today says about 15 minutes before the fatal shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, an officer said to Kyle Rittenhouse, "We appreciate you, thank you," and so forth, and gave him water. It was assessed at 12:49 Eastern Time, 8:29, as I was documenting his story and what they write about his story. It says it claimed the video showed police thanked Kyle Rittenhouse and gave him water prior to the killings. I won't read this whole one, but I just want to point out when they say it was tragically familiar, that national pattern, until two protesters were shot, just how fast they switched the topic from why it was tragically familiar in our nation, and didn't go down the line of the police shooting Black men, but rather jumped into the story of Kyle Rittenhouse. And they say he was able to leave the scene, even though, as caught on video, he walked toward police with his hands up as protesters yelled. They were yelling at the men in the trucks. They were screaming at them that he just killed people, and he had his hands up ready to surrender, and yet they let him walk off. And there's video to prove it. And while I can keep pressing play of that teen arrested, his story is not the one that is the most important to me. Because as you remember, this guy was allowed to walk away, and Black Lives Matter in North Chicago was started by some brothers there on behalf of a sister who lost her son named Justice, who was killed and who was also 17. And that person wasn't allowed to run away. But this 17-year-old, who was not a law-abiding citizen and did not have the right to open carry in Wisconsin after a state of emergency declared curfew, was allowed to walk away after killing people. Reacting to a second question about the 17-year-old shooter who police thanked and gave water to, our brother Mandela, Lieutenant Governor Barnes said he saw, the statement came from the governor, who said he saw the same thing and was concerned, and he would like to disinvite all of the people running around with long guns. So imagine all of this flying through our brother Mandela's head. 50 people arrested, one in possession. They see someone walking toward them with their hands up. Someone. Very non-specific. The facts: on August 23rd, Blake was shot 7 times by Officer Sheshki. He's partially paralyzed now. August 24th, the National Guard there to support Kenosha. August 25th, police clashed with the protesters. And what we know about Jacob Blake's shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin has been PolitiFact checked by the Poynter Institute as well. They also captured images from the ground when that pepper spray and choking gas and whatever dispersal non-lethal force was used against the people. Non-lethal force. Looked at that report and the things that they had to say. Got to tell you, I was not impressed. They started off, this is PolitiFact, the Poynter Institute, saying police in Illinois have arrested a teenager in connection with the killing of 2 people during a third night of protests over the shooting of Jacob Blake, a black man, by a white police officer in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He said police in Illinois arrested him. Could have happened in Wisconsin, but they let him walk away. The fact that they pointed out it was a third night, and then a couple of things that you see underlined: a black man and a white police officer. I call to your attention because of how specific they was and the nouns they selected. I call it out because I would believe that it omits some truth there, some truth that had been recounted by the person who filmed it. The eyewitness said that he was in a headlock on one side and in a headlock on the other side, and they was feeding him body shots, digging. And what the report also omits is the fact that they said he was tasered by 2 officers. To me, that's just like being shot, but in any event, it's the deployment of non-lethal force or deployment of a weapon. Now, while I don't understand the ass whooping, and I don't understand the tasering, and I damn sure don't understand 7 shots in the back, because the man does have a right to defend himself with a spoon, a pen, a knife, his fingernails. He can bite, he can scratch, he can do whatever he must to defend himself when dangerous racial profiling occurs. What I cannot understand for the life of me is that flamethrower. No, I won't show the destruction of the black body, but I will say that on the very next day, ABL was able to capture this image and post it as fast could. And it drew my attention to this conversation because I saw the black in this experience even before I knew that this was the black experience being told. And though that black experience has been covered from the top to the bottom in whiteness, on the top there are those considered the white agitators, or that ambiguous term Antifa, and Black Lives Matter, but white supporters and allies on the top. And then on the bottom, as of August 26th, the white nationalists or white supremacists or the white militants or the militia groups, the Kenosha Guard on the bottom. While that whiteness wants to cover the story, I know in the middle that this is the black experience and that that's the real story being told. And so we can remove the top and we can remove the bottom and focus in on that all too familiar yellow tape and how important and vital it was, if we shade it in our black perspective, for a brother like Clyde to show up. Activist Clyde McLemore leads a large crowd in anti-police chants outside of the Kenosha County Courthouse on Monday, August 24th, 2020 in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Now, once again, the incident that sparked his activism. Now, this is a brother who's been arrested himself for running from the law, but he's also been arrested, if you look at his police record, which they love to do, for fighting back. And when you look up and say, damn, well, who is Clyde and why did he become an activist? He has no problem telling you about his story, fighting back. Fight the power. fight the power at B. And that next generation, like the cameraman who was able to see it, knew that just recording it would not be enough. Getting a tweet would not be enough, but he needed an ability to organize, and he needed a structured movement to organize around. He needed money right now to get all those posters printed up. He needed people to drive vehicles. He needed a lay of the land. He needed maps. He needed compasses. He needed water. They already had the masks, although some chose not to wear those. Source of this image, Scott Olson, Getty. Ironic enough, I took an interest in reparations as a self-interested aim. As an interest in establishing family lineage, despite the odds, geopolitically before the 1900s, and that's hard work. Somebody may have to slow that down, rewind it, and understand what I said. I said, ironic enough, I took an interest in reparations as a selfish aim, as an interest in establishing my family lineage, geopolitically before the 1900s, and that's work. And it's an ideology that's very extreme, which is identity and the Black identity politic. And for that reason, activists would be key targets of the anti-terrorism briefing. And the reason why combat missions, joint operations from Air, Army, and the National Guard, and their reserve units or National Guard units to the numbers of 1,000, and their equipment like MRAPs would be parked on the communities where Black people live during civil unrest. And so I wanted to substantiate the DNA test results with actual timelines, facts, places, and people they say I descend from. Reparations. So that's what I study in my spare time as an alternative to watching Black news. And some stories do deserve a second or third level inquiry, such as this Jacob Blake story. And so hopefully I've been able to contribute with this live documentation of what can be known going forward as the Jacob Blake incident. I put a pause on that. I put a pause on my Google Gate research. I put a pause on the airplane gate, hashtag airplane gate, to remind us that we are in an ongoing struggle for human rights in America. And while there are people with planes who can exercise the constitutional right to deploy right now and commit the same atrocities they've committed across history, or option B, they could drive up that MRAP and park it There are those people, and there's the side that they're on, and there is the side that says Black Lives Matter. And it would have been easy to stop at that surface level and only discuss my views on Black Lives Matter as an organization. But I decided to tell you about Clyde and Rayshawn White, who was traumatized, but so traumatized, he got his ass out there and got organized. And with that coalition, it got hot. And because it got hot in some spaces, it couldn't be peaceful anymore. And in his story, Mr. Jacob Blake, I kind of see it this way. A black man who, when the police pull up, see, we don't have this information yet, and the officers haven't disclosed their statements, but when the police show up, he's like, oh, shit, here they go with that bullshit. And when they come to try to put their hands on him or just to talk to him or whatever it is, it sounds more or less like a man saying, man, leave me the fuck alone. Who then ends up tased twice for disobeying a lawful order. And despite, if that story is true, it's been left out and omitted from some statements on both sides. But despite whether it's true or not, let's just go with the assumption that it was true. They tased the brother after they had him in a headlock, according to Rayshawn White, and feeding him body shots for disobeying a lawful order, i.e. 8 p.m. curfew. If you're not 18 years old, you don't have the right to open carry in Wisconsin, a lawful order. Despite the body shots that he had to eat, him saying, I'm still leaving, I'm gone, I'm out of here. And so they shot him 7 times in the back. Swiss cheesed him is how I described it. Swiss cheesed our brother Jacob Blake, who's now paralyzed from the waist down. He was released. And the father has a couple of stories working in his favor right now. But he has a hell of a lot more stories and statements working against him. Stories working on his favor include those statements from the governor and the lieutenant governor pushing for reform. Statements working in his favor include policies by Facebook, which had a week before, which was August 11th. They had already declared some type of ban. But even with the automated robots and 4 moderators, they weren't able to enforce it. But it's still in the defense, and thus a statement. And because of that, there's also the GoFundMe that was generated in the defense and for the healing of our brother that he might recover. Statements that led to the handcuffs being taken off and what one reporter identified as the warrant being removed. I would also add to this statements from major cities' chiefs. And I would add this because the police chief there, who had been praised by 4-5, gets it wrong here and is defending the wrong side. And I know, I get it, but it's wrong. And it's not wrong because B1 Brother Moses says it. It's wrong because the city's chiefs. And so they can change the name of the football team, the Chiefs, but Chiefs themselves, they ain't gonna not misappropriate that. I digress because I don't know if is Native American, but Chiefs, I could probably bet my last dollar that has to do with cultural hijacking. The major cities' chiefs in this battle for Lake Michigan and beyond, the major city chiefs, executive summary. And the sources from President Obama's task force has 6 pillar recommendations. Number 1 from the police chiefs is building trust and legitimacy. That's number 1. Tell you how the chief gets it wrong. But I want you to see that it's not about what Brother Moses tells you where he gets it wrong. We have to show the information. Number 2 from the major cities chiefs is policy and oversight. So a clear hierarchy. which was just unenforceable here. National Guard, 1,000 of them, the badasses, the bad motherfuckers that were parked, and so many other examples where it was not going to happen. Oversight? What do you mean oversight? Oversight? But the major cities chiefs talked about technology and social media. And so for Facebook to fail, that's small symbolic victory. Just like having Lieutenant Governor look like us is symbolism. But number 4, the community policing and crime reduction. This comes from the major cities chiefs. Number 5, the officer training and education. That should go back to the 90s. They've been asking for, well, how were they trained? What's the policy? What is the visitors of the what is it, the National Guard base and those in support of the military, those visitors, what are they trained on? What's their training? Or the police officers, what is their training? That's always been there. And then finally, number 6 is officer safety and wellness. This came from the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing in 2015. And it was independent investigations of officer-involved shootings then, just like it's the independent investigation of officer-involved shootings. And with that as a source, and all those bullet notes, their major finding is that the system is broken. Recommended citation is Coons, Joseph B., Josie F. Cambereri, Shannon Messer, and Daryl Stevens, 2018, Independent Investigation of Officer-Involved Shootings, Current Practices and Recommendations from Law Leaders in the United States and Canada. And this is the battle for Lake Michigan. Recap, nigga. In the telling of his story, the eyewitness himself, who was now traumatized and experiencing what many would expect to be death threats, even in his sleep, had to organize because it wasn't enough just to record a video. Just so happens to have a connection with an OG in the hood who's been pushing for a stronger media attention about a 17-year-old named Justice. And so that cameraman then links up with Black Lives Matter, which for many is an uncomfortable concept, because by linking up with Black Lives Matter, you're not in control of that environment anymore. You have no control or no knowledge of whom may show up and claim to be an ally. Those who show up may also be those who believe in Blue Lives Matter. They may also be people who believe LGBTQ lives matter. And for the most part, you'll find participants willing to walk beside you who are at heart, all lives matter. But in any event, having to use the platform and the space and the organization of Black Lives Matter opens you up to vulnerabilities of not knowing which ally you'd be walking beside at any given moment of the day. Let alone do you have control over who you would be protesting with against an 8 p.m. curfew. And if it really gets hot and it's no longer about walking, you lose line of sight on even those closest to you that joined for all the right reasons with all the wrong intentions. I put a pause to discuss this Jacob Blake incident once again, and I do so to contribute to the live documentation of what can be considered the ongoing struggle for our human rights. In America, it would have been easy to stop right here at the surface level and discuss my views on Black Lives Matter. Or we can carry this conversation forward and talk about the women who joined that front line. I mean, when I see this, I'm like, what are you doing with that camera? That camera can't protect you. And then you think about Rayshawn White, who gets the death threats and says, not only can that camera not protect you, but it can become a dangerous possession. That property and so while I don't go into the victims of the Kenosha shooting on August 26th, I do want to tell you that there was a victim of a shooting 5 years ago who was 17 years old. And there's still been no justice for justice. And that's why Clyde was out there in the first place. I don't cry for the mattress store owner like that 4-5. I don't care that there's political ramifications for President 4-5. I care that there were 50 people arrested. And that Jacob Blake is a bigger threat with or without a knife than a motherfucker with a flamethrower. Their only rebuttal from their statements, what the officers were driving into, was a shots fired complaint, plural, not a shooting, not a person down complaint. They're responding to that. And they see someone walking toward them with their hands up. No, if you can be as specific to say that they see someone and as specific to say that they arrested someone in possession of a flamethrower, then you can be specific when they ask you a question about Kyle Rittenhouse and say they saw Kyle and they did not see a threat. And the reason why they keep it specific is so that they don't have to confirm not seeing the humanity of Jacob Blake. But I've made a lot of statements and allegations that seem bold, and it's up to me to prove it, not just say it. In a statement released Friday, the National Foundation for Gun Rights called Rittenhouse a law-abiding teenager who had the right to defend himself. Executive Director Dudley Brown told the Chicago Tribune the organization has not spoken with the family and has not had any direct conversations with his lawyers. Now, there was this fake lawyer, a real lawyer out of Atlanta, who said that he was representing the team. That has not been confirmed. And so here, the National Foundation for Gun Rights, an advocacy group, it's about $12.45 million in revenue, out of Colorado, is speaking on behalf of this 17-year-old. We had African Americans who provide Black content who said this was not our story. So they looked over Clyde and Al, and they looked over Rayshawn. And they said, we're taking the story away from Jacob Blake by even discussing this little white boy. I said, keep it in context because you're missing some very, very real content in how they tell his story and what they're writing. This National Foundation for Gun Rights is out of Colorado. And they're trying to speak and give statements. But they're not the ones considered outside agitators. You know who would be? The Not Fucking Around Coalition. And so, Kenosha police officer Vincent Arenas would be allowed to fly under the radar without ever having to give a statement as to why he felt the need to put his hands on our brother in the first place. They would allow him to get by with saying, well, he wasn't the shooter. The only shooter was someone else, although they don't know who, in fact, tased him. They said the brother was tased twice. Was it this guy? Was this the guy that Rayshawn White was referring to, had him in a headlock, feeding him them little body shots that he ate and still said in his mind, or in my mind, I'm walking away. I'm getting the fuck out of here. Is this the defendant who did not grant our brother the right to walk away peacefully? Charges have not been officially filed on Officer Seshki, the one they said is responsible for discharging his firearm 7-8 times, something like that, said the governor. Oh, excuse me, 7 or 8 times, according to the governor. So this Officer Shitsky gets to get away. This Officer Shazeski or this Kazgiski or Shkarecki, Officer Shkarecki. I don't know this dude's name. This Officer Shinzeki, Shkaveski, Stavicki. She is key to this investigation. Not secondary comments from the symbol, Lieutenant Governor Mandela, who does remind me of Barnes. Matt Barnes. My statement would be that should be the most expensive bottled water ever offered an enemy combatant during an armed insurrection. That would be my statement. I would look to confirm whether or not that kid is affiliated with, or being represented by militia members, and that deep state relationship between militia members in the battle for Lake Michigan. I would also say that this is another example of state-sanctioned violence. I would back it up with that anti-terrorism or that briefing material from the National Guard for their visitors in support of the military as they were talking about supplies and equipment. And I would say that water is a supply. I would draw your attention to the quote that they used, assisting agencies. And those assisting agencies then being permitted to access those supplies. But those unauthorized, well, those folks are the same as those who would be considered looters. This open fire was not the authorization given by the military. The police chief did not say we have an open fire situation, open fire, guns blazing, fire back. So the police chief didn't, and the commander of the National Guard didn't give an open fire for those under their commands. Because of that, of course, Kyle would be tried as an enemy combatant. I would also allude to the videos that have been captured to show that it was tactical, that Kyle did not act alone, that throughout the day there were many, and that individual was ideology, which just basically equals crime. And while we cannot connect Kyle to the Facebook stream, we do understand that a call to arms was issued, and the technology that we have today was not able to prevent that call to arms rallying and mobilizing against Clyde. And as long as we're able to keep masking it in language like Antifa, outside agitator, Black Lives Matter, for instance, and we stop, we lose focus on the fact that that's OG Clyde ass, who's still trying to get justice for justice in North Chicago. And for many, the conversation later down the line will refer to like the murders of Allison Parker and Adam Ward, who were in Roanoke, Virginia, fatally shot down on August 26, 2015, 5 years ago, while conducting a live television interview near Smith Mountain Lake. They were shot down by a gunman. The USA Today fact check was assessed at 12:49 Eastern Time, 8/29/2020. The reasons that we hear, the reason why we feel our paper won't disappear. Oh, hey, it's been a long time in the Bay. Man, it's been a long time. I only know the version that came out like that Bay Area rendition of The Reasons. It's a classic, man. You got to check that one out. The Bay Area, the Black Panthers, it means a lot to me to see this happen. And so I see it and I take it from a completely different perspective, although I can see what's going on. And right now, I wanted to be able to share with you a little bit more information, see, because we have things happening and we have statements being made and sides are being drawn. And so in our fight for Breonna, which is Fred T. Joseph, the tweet person who was tweeting that story and tweeting that information and tweeting that video, and he got a lot of views for tweeting that run live video of the Kenosha Kyle attack. And he gets it. And he actually tweets about the political actions and things all the time. And remember that this guy is a stark advocate. Fred T. Joseph, you can check him out on Twitter. He's an advocate because we are still fighting. And there's Until Freedom is another group, our fight for Breonna. And they are still asking people to invest in their work. And the website that they have is what you see on the screen. Any of these, what we would consider advocates or allies, are just like the equivalent of Black Lives Matter in the eyes of the faux five. And so if they send any representatives to be on the ground, or if they even appointed a right to record and to film and to broadcast to people that were standing boots on the ground, those people would also be considered enemy combatants in the eyes of governors or generals or police, and thus we have work to do. This group is powerful. This group is one of my favorites. That group has counter protesters like, I don't know if y'all remember this story, but there was the militia members who were presumably supporting the Border Patrol agents, and then that information was disavowed. Eventually, they finally went and arrested the self-titled commander of the U.S. Border Militia, and that person was called to appear before the judge. And there's a bloody history of the border militias that's also worth investigating should you have time. I include it as a way of reinforming those who may have said, you know what, that's right, but allowed that connection to just drift, in the establishing of evidence that says white supremacists and the government are running hand in hand, and it's not some boogeyman myth. There are actually people. And I talk about that as a form of reality. My identity is intact, so I don't much have to defend what side I know I'm on, especially when there are folks like Nick Estes, a professor of American Studies at the University of New Mexico, where that Border Patrol commander went down. The author of the book, Our History is the Future, remembers listening to the police scanners earlier that summer when the gun-toting militia group, New Mexico Civil Guard, turned up to harass and attack anti-racist protesters in Albuquerque. He said cops could be heard on a scanner referring to this group of, loaded language, vigilantes, founded by a neo-Nazi as heavily armed friendlies. One of the areas where we struggle is the Black folks. In all due respect, who are behind the shield and thus affiliated and associated by blood ritual to the Blue Lives Matter. As you're in this wall, black man, black man, black woman. So much to be said in just this photo, and those behind as hierarchy of a front line, who's on the second line, who's on the third line of this formation. The question would be, if you have 1,000 National Guard already there to represent and to serve in some form of a wave, why then would it even be mistaken for a white militia group there on the scene that they are the friendly? They who are walking around brandishing the armaments of warfare to compete against you. And it is so with a certain level of respect that I have for those who know the system, like Ben Crump, who studied it and also went to school to serve as a function of this system, who told that line. Ben Crump, who published this one. At 7:24 p.m., he said the incident happened at 5:11. This was 7:24. 2 hours later, August 23rd, published from Tallahassee. which received 52,000 retweets and 23,000 quotes, 88,000 likes at the time this tweet was assessed, where he says, "Wow, or the world of war. This black man was shot several times in the back by Kenosha police today. He was getting into his car after apparently breaking up a fight between two women. He's in critical condition now. We demand justice." The way I view it, this Second Amendment right that they like to talk about, in order to prove their complicity, we refer to these type of stories. In the battle for Lake Michigan, white militias showed up to the Capitol just like Clyde showed up to the courthouse. Those white militias came with their long rifles, and the governor there said, "I respect people's right to dissent, but that does not extend to endangering other people's lives, and we take it very seriously." There was a correction made on May 14th, 2020 that says a previous version of this story incorrectly called Michigan United for Liberty a militia group. Catch this. Though several militia groups were at the protest, they're inside of that Capitol in the battle for Lake Michigan with their long rifles. In the Capitol, not on the lawn, in the Capitol this time. It says, correction, Michigan United for Liberty, a militia group. It was wrongfully, they called it wrong, they say. It was incorrectly called, excuse me, back up, slow down. A previous version of this story incorrectly called Michigan United for Liberty, a militia group. Though several militia groups were at the protest, they confirm Michigan United for Liberty does not identify as such. Still with me? What's to come? Ahead of Derby weekend, protests. In fact, leader walks back his claim to burn this city down. Just published here today, from whom has been identified of the Not Fucking Around Coalition. She fucked him up. So the question, the question was about you. You said last time you was here, if they don't give you the information you need, which is like a conviction or a charge on those officers in 4 weeks, y'all was coming to burn this motherfucker down. What about that? It's been 4 weeks, and they haven't charged these officers. And it's like he danced like David dance, boy, the commander dance. And so she called him on it. She said, okay, so you back said that your original intention was about disrupting commerce. How is that going to happen if ain't nobody going to be there in the first place? That they can still make the same amount online gambling and betting spaces, sports betting, but they already lost the gate for the Kentucky Derby because they had already said nobody was going to be there. What does going to the Kentucky Derby have to do with anything with that mission? You said commerce, make it make sense. And so she called him on that and was like, well, I don't know how to say it. Dance like David dance. Boy, that boy dancing, but go ahead. I guess that's enough of sharing his information, although it was very relevant. And if that's as much as they will allow me to capture for the stream, then that's enough that we will capture for the stream. Says Churchill Down, which has already released their statement. And this is the telling of his story, where they say, the Kentucky Derby has been run every year for the past 145 years. It is a great American tradition that has survived depressions, wars, pandemics, myriad changes in our country, large and small. Years after the end of the Civil War and end of slavery in America, over 1967 Derby, protesters took to the streets around churches demanding equality and change. Today, more than 50 years after that, our fellow Kentuckians and fellow Americans are still asking to be heard. For all of us to understand the ongoing inequality that exists and finally to adopt meaningful change. The Kentucky Derby says in their statement, in our country and our city and in our sport. We know that there are some who disagree with our decision to run the Kentucky Derby this year. We respect that, made our decision in belief that traditions can remind us of what binds us together as Americans, even as we seek to acknowledge and repair the terrible pain that rends us apart. Our sport shares disconcerting history that led to the exclusion of jockey participation through the years. The legacy of the Kentucky Derby begins with the incredible success of Black jockeys. I'll say it again. Of the Kentucky Derby begins with the incredible success of Black jockeys. I'll say it one more time for those in the back who would be asking, why? Oh my goodness. Let's see. Boy, did they kill my audio. Scandalous. But it is what it is. I was getting to the point anyway. If you can read my lips, justice for justice. B1, Brother Moses. That's all I got. Check. I think they killed my audio, which is, and I understand it because Southern Poverty Law Center been on their heads. That group in New Mexico garnered national media attention because they detained nearly 300 migrants. They wore military-style uniforms and masks, camped without permission on property owned by the government. And after posting a video of the detentions online, they were forced to leave. The group's leader was arrested. Later, a member was ousted after he detailed his desire to shoot migrants. Group, they went and got their commander, if you would call him that, has a similar experience to what happened in the Jacob Blake story. There was an emergency roll call on social media that called for patriots who can be heavily armed to take part in a coordinated effort between a volunteer patriot force and the Border Patrol. The message included, without proof, the fantastic retired generals were helping the patriot effort, and that they had already captured a group of 4 ISIS and a group of 100 ISIS members. An expected second wave of invaders would include 20,000 men trained in the United Nations, monetarily supported by George Soros, to include foreign troops. Now, that was the story that they used about that wave of migrants. Border Patrol group who went down and detained around 300 of them. And at the same time, Churchill Downs, so let me make sure you can see what I'm saying, in case I'm saying. And at that same time, Churchill Downs, which says it has a legacy originating in Black jockeys, profited ever since, but yet it is too slow to respond and to enact change, including discrimination against Blacks, released a statement. Churchill Down track is currently closed. The commander made a statement that they've lost revenue and that what he is doing is working and that he will be there on. What was also released was the statement by the 3%ers saying, well, they will be there too. Operating in the same context as this war for Lake Michigan is a war in Louisville. I am mad that my audio, but I am proud to have been able to deliver this information in the story of Jacob Blake. There's a lot of meat in there. There are a lot of sources. And so finally, I bid you adieu. B1, Brother Moses. You know the scoop. You know what's happening. You know what's popping. You know why we at it, man. We got work to do. We will continue to deliver on the information if you appreciate it. then I appreciate you. Be sure to hit that like. And if you know somebody that likes this type of content, be sure to share it with them. Be one, Brother Moses. That now is all I got. Salute, and I'm out.